The thunderous crack of a gunshot echoed through Willow Creek as Madeleine Evans pressed her back against the weather-beaten wall of her family's barn, her trembling hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. The year was 1875, and at 19, her life had just become impossibly complicated. "You shame this family, Maddie." Her father's voice boomed across the yard, his silhouette framed in the doorway of their modest ranch house. "I won't have my daughter carrying the bastard child of some drifting cowhand." Tears streamed down Madeleine's face as she watched her mother's shadow appear behind her father's imposing figure. Martha Evans had always been the peacemaker, but even she stood silent now, her disappointment a palpable force that cut deeper than her father's rage. "I love him, Pa," Madeleine called back, her voice breaking. "Isaac will come back for me, just like he promised." Thomas Evans spat on the ground. "That Lancaster boy is nothing but sweet talk and empty promises. Been gone 3 months already. If he'd meant to make an honest woman of you, he'd have done it before heading out on that cattle drive." The truth of her father's words stung, but Madeleine refused to believe them. Isaac Lancaster had sworn his love to her under a canopy of stars, had promised to return with enough money to start their life together. She hadn't told him about the baby before he left. She hadn't known herself. "You have 2 choices," her father continued, his voice flat and final. "You can go to your Aunt Catherine's place in Colorado until that situation is resolved, or you can leave my house for good." Madeleine's heart felt like it was being torn from her chest. "Resolved? This is your grandchild, Pa. No child of mine would bring such disgrace upon this family. Your aunt will arrange for the baby to be given to a proper family after it's born." He turned away, signaling the conversation was over. "You leave on tomorrow's stage. Pack your things." That night, Madeleine lay in her childhood bed, one hand resting on her stomach, whispering promises to the tiny life growing inside her. "Your father will find us," she murmured. "He's a good man, the best man I've ever known." She recalled their first meeting at the spring social just 8 months ago. Isaac Lancaster had ridden into Willow Creek with a cattle outfit from Texas, his lean frame and quiet confidence immediately setting him apart from the local boys. While the others boasted and strutted, Isaac had simply smiled at her from across the dance floor, his deep blue eyes crinkling at the corners. "May I have this dance, miss?" he'd asked, his voice a gentle rumble that seemed to vibrate through her very soul. For 3 glorious months, they'd stolen every moment they could together. Isaac had dreams bigger than the Montana Territory, plans to save enough to buy his own land where they could build a life. "I'll come back for you," he'd promised the night before he left with a cattle drive bound for Kansas City. "Wait for me, Maddie." Now, as she packed her meager belongings by candlelight, those words haunted her. How would Isaac find her if she wasn't here when he returned? She had to leave a message somehow, tell someone who could tell him where she'd gone. Just before dawn, Madeleine slipped from the house and made her way to the stables where old Jim, who had worked for her father since before she was born, was already tending to the horses. "Miss Maddie," he acknowledged with a sad nod. "Heard you're leaving us today." "Jim," she whispered urgently, "when Isaac Lancaster returns, you must tell him where I've gone. Tell him about the baby. Please." The weathered stable hand looked pained. "Your pa's forbidden anyone to speak of it, miss. Says you're going east for schooling, that's all." "Please, Jim," she begged, pressing a small silver locket, Isaac's parting gift, to her into his calloused palm. "If you ever cared for me at all." The old man's eyes softened as he closed his fingers around the locket. "I'll do what I can, Miss Maddie. That's all I can promise." It was barely enough, but it had to do. Hours later, as the stagecoach rattled away from Willow Creek, Madeleine gazed out the window at the only home she'd ever known, wondering if she would ever see it or Isaac again. The journey to Silverton, Colorado was grueling. Spring had not yet fully released its grip on the mountains, and the stagecoach lurched and swayed along muddy roads. By the time they arrived at her aunt's remote homestead, Madeleine was exhausted and heartsick. Aunt Catherine was a widow who lived alone in a small but tidy cabin nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines. Unlike Madeleine's parents, she showed no outward judgment about her niece's condition, though her practical approach was hardly comforting. "You'll stay here until the baby comes," she explained as she showed Madeleine to a small room at the back of the cabin. "After that, there's a couple in Denver who've been married 10 years with no children of their own. They'll provide a good home." "I'm not giving my baby away," Madeleine stated firmly, her hands protective over her stomach. "This child's father will come for us." Catherine's expression softened slightly. "Your father told me about this cowboy of yours. Men like that don't settle down, Maddie. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be." But Madeleine refused to give up hope. Throughout the following months, as spring turned to summer and her body changed with the growing life inside her, she wrote letters to Isaac that she could never send, not knowing where he was. Each night, she would stand on the porch and gaze at the stars, wondering if he was looking at the same sky, if he had returned to Willow Creek only to find her gone. Isaac Lancaster rode hard through the Montana Territory, his horse lathered and heaving beneath him. 6 months away had felt like an eternity, but the cattle drive had paid better than expected. In his pocket was enough money for a down payment on a small spread. He'd had his eye on enough to start a life with Madeleine. The thought of her made his heart race faster than his galloping horse. Her sweet smile, the way her honey-colored hair caught the sunlight, how her laughter seemed to chase away every dark thought he'd ever had. She was everything good in this world, and he'd been a fool to leave her, even for a moment. As he crested the final hill overlooking Willow Creek, Isaac felt a surge of emotion so powerful it nearly knocked him from his saddle. He was home, not the Texas ranch where he'd been raised, but wherever Madeleine was. That was home now. The Evans ranch looked much the same as when he'd left, though the summer flowers Madeleine so lovingly tended were now replaced by the golden hues of early autumn. Isaac's hands trembled slightly as he dismounted in front of the main house, suddenly nervous as a schoolboy. Would she be angry that he'd been gone so long? Would she still want him? His knock was answered by Thomas Evans himself, whose face darkened instantly upon recognition. "Mr. Evans, sir," Isaac began, removing his hat respectfully. "I've come to get off my property," Evans growled, his hand moving ominously toward the shotgun propped by the door. Isaac stood his ground. "Sir, I understand you might have reservations about me, but I've come back with honest intentions. I love your daughter, and I aim to marry her, with your blessing if possible, without it if necessary." Evans' laugh was harsh. "You're too late, boy. Madeleine's gone." The world seemed to tilt beneath Isaac's feet. "Gone? What do you mean, gone?" "East. To finishing school." "Girl needed some refinement. Away from the likes of you." Evans moved to close the door. "She's not coming back, so don't waste your time hanging around." Isaac's hand shot out, stopping the door. "I don't believe you. Let me speak to Mrs. Evans, please. My wife has nothing to say to you either. Now get your hand off my door before I remove it permanently." Something in the older man's eyes, a flicker of something beyond mere dislike, made Isaac step back. There was more to this story than he was being told, and he intended to find out what. For the next week, Isaac haunted Willow Creek, asking discreet questions about Madeleine's departure. Most townsfolk claimed to know only that she'd gone east for education, but their averted eyes told him there were secrets being kept. It was during a quiet moment at the town's only saloon that Isaac finally got a break. Old Jim, the Evans stable hand, settled onto the stool beside him, ordered a whiskey, and spoke without looking at him. "She didn't go east for schooling. Isaac's heart nearly stopped. Where is she, Jim? The old man took a long swallow of his drink. Colorado. Her aunt's place near Silverton. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a familiar silver locket. She wanted you to know. Isaac's fingers closed around the locket, the metal warm from Jim's pocket. Why? Why would they send her away? Jim's weathered face creased with a mixture of sympathy and discomfort. There's more you need to know, son. The reason they sent her away. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Miss Maddie's in a family way. Your child, she says. The news hit Isaac like a physical blow. A child. His child. And Madeleine, alone and cast out by her family. Rage and tenderness warred within him, along with a profound sense of guilt. He should have been here, should have known. They're planning to give the baby away once it's born, Jim continued. That's why you need to hurry if you aim to stop it. Isaac was on his feet in an instant, tossing coins on the bar. Where exactly in Silverton? Jim gave him what directions he could, and within the hour, Isaac had gathered his few possessions and was riding south toward Colorado, his heart pounding with determination and fear. Fear that he might be too late, that Madeleine might believe he had abandoned her, that his child might be lost to him forever. The journey was treacherous, especially as autumn gave way to winter's first advance. Isaac pushed through early snowstorms and icy mountain passes, his body aching and his supplies dwindling. But the thought of Madeleine and their unborn child drove him onward, refusing to yield to exhaustion or the elements. Meanwhile, in Colorado, Madeleine's time grew near. By November, she could barely move around the small cabin, her belly swollen with the child she already loved more than life itself. Despite her aunt's continued insistence on the adoption plan, Madeleine remained steadfast. She would find a way to keep her baby and make a life for them, with or without Isaac, though the thought of doing it alone filled her with dread. On a bitter cold night, as the first serious snowfall of the season blanketed the valley, Madeleine went into labor. The pain was unlike anything she had ever experienced, and her aunt's practiced but clinical assistance offered little comfort. Hour after excruciating hour passed as Madeleine fought to bring her child into the world. I can see the head, Catherine announced after what seemed like days. One more push, Maddie. With a final, agonizing effort, Madeleine felt her child slip from her body, and then the most beautiful sound she'd ever heard filled the room, the strong, indignant cry of her newborn. A boy, Catherine said, her voice softening despite herself as she cleaned and wrapped the infant. A strong, healthy boy. When Catherine placed the tiny bundle in Madeleine's arms, the world seemed to stop. His little face, red and wrinkled, bore an unmistakable resemblance to Isaac, the same determined chin, the same arch of eyebrows. Hello, my love, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I'm your mama, and I will never let you go. Catherine watched from the foot of the bed, her expression troubled. Maddie, you know the arrangements. There are no arrangements, Madeleine interrupted, her voice stronger than it had been in months. This is my son. Mine and Isaac's. I'm keeping him. And how exactly do you plan to support a child? You have no husband, no money, no skills to speak of. I'll find a way, Madeleine insisted, though the practicalities of her situation were indeed daunting. I'll work. I'll do whatever it takes. Catherine sighed heavily. Your father won't take you back. Not with the child. And the couple in Denver, they're good people, Maddie. They can give him things you never could. For the first time, doubt crept into Madeleine's resolve. What kind of life could she offer her son? A life of poverty and struggle, of whispers and sidelong glances. Was her love enough to overcome all that? As if sensing her distress, the baby began to fuss, his tiny face scrunching in displeasure. Madeleine instinctively brought him to her breast, and as he latched on, a fierce, primal certainty washed over her. This was her child, her flesh and blood. She would find a way. She had to. "His name is William," she said softly, stroking his downy head. "William Isaac Evans." Catherine's mouth tightened, but she said nothing more about the adoption. Instead, she busied herself cleaning up, leaving Madeleine to marvel at the perfect little being in her arms. That night, as a winter storm howled outside the cabin, Madeleine made a decision. As soon as she was strong enough to travel, she would take William and head west, not back to Montana, but to California perhaps, where she had heard a woman might find work and a fresh start. But fate had other plans. 3 days after William's birth, as Madeleine was just beginning to regain her strength, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the afternoon stillness. Catherine went to the window, squinting against the snow's glare. "A rider," she announced, reaching for her shawl. "Probably lost in the storm. I'll see what they want." Madeleine, nursing William in bed, felt a strange flutter in her chest, a premonition, perhaps, or simply hope that refused to die. She heard the cabin door open, heard muffled voices, and then silence. The bedroom door creaked open slowly, and Catherine appeared, her face pale with shock. "Maddie," she whispered, "there's someone here for you." And then he was there, filling the doorway with his tall frame, his dark hair dusted with melting snow, his blue eyes finding hers immediately. Isaac Lancaster looked thinner than she remembered. His face weathered from hard travel, but to Madeleine, he had never been more beautiful. "Maddie," he breathed, his voice cracking with emotion. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then William, disturbed by the interruption, began to fuss, drawing Isaac's attention to the bundle in Madeleine's arms. His eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Is that—" he began, taking a hesitant step forward. Tears spilled down Madeleine's cheeks as she nodded. "Your son, Isaac. Our son." With trembling hands, Isaac removed his hat, crossed the small room, and knelt beside the bed. His eyes, filled with wonder and disbelief, moved from Madeleine's face to the baby's and back again. "I didn't know," he whispered hoarsely. "I swear to God, Maddie, I didn't know. Jim only told me a week ago. I came as fast as I could." "You came," she repeated, hardly daring to believe he was real. "You actually came for us." "I would have crossed oceans to find you," he said fiercely. Then, more gently, May I hold him?" With careful movements, Madeleine transferred the now quiet infant into his father's arms. Isaac's large, calloused hands cradled the tiny body with infinite tenderness, and when William wrapped his fingers around Isaac's thumb, a sob escaped the cowboy's throat. "He's perfect," Isaac murmured, awe evident in every syllable. "What's his name?" "William Isaac Evans," Madeleine replied softly, "though I'd hoped one day he might carry your name instead." Isaac's gaze locked with hers, intense and unwavering. "Maddie Evans, I rode here to ask you to be my wife. Finding out about our son only makes that desire 1,000 times stronger. Will you marry me? Will you make us a family, proper and true?" Joy bubbled up inside Madeleine, brighter and more powerful than any she had ever known. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Isaac, I will marry you." As he leaned forward to seal their promise with a kiss, William nestled between them. Madeleine knew that whatever hardships lay ahead, they would face them together. Catherine, watching from the doorway, cleared her throat. "Well," she said, her practical nature reasserting itself, "I suppose I'd better send word to that couple in Denver that their services won't be needed after all." The days that followed were a blur of planning and preparation. Despite Catherine's initial reservations about Isaac formed largely from her brother's negative portrayal, she gradually warmed to the earnest young man who clearly adored both Madeleine and little William. Isaac explained his plans to them over dinner the second night. "I've saved enough for a small place. Not in Montana," he added, seeing Madeleine's expression cloud at the mention of her home territory. "I was thinking Colorado might suit us fine. There's good land south of here near Durango. Enough for a modest ranch to start, with room to grow." "You want to stay in Colorado?" Madeleine asked, surprised. She had assumed they would head back to Texas, where Isaac had family. "I want to be wherever makes you happy," he replied simply. "And I thought being somewhat near your aunt might be a comfort to you, especially with the baby." Catherine, who had been silently serving stew, looked up in surprise. "That's considerate of you, Mr. Lancaster. Call me Isaac, please. And it's purely selfish on my part," he added with a smile. "We'll need someone to spoil our children on occasion." Madeleine's heart swelled at his words, not just the implication of more children to come, but the easy way he included her aunt in their future, despite knowing how Catherine had initially supported giving William away. The storm that had brought Isaac to them lingered for days, making travel impossible and giving the new family precious time to bond. Isaac spent hours simply holding William, memorizing every feature of his son's face, singing softly to him when he fussed. Madeleine watched them together, her heart full to bursting, hardly believing her prayers had been answered so completely. On the fifth day, when the skies finally cleared, Catherine made an unexpected announcement over breakfast. "I've been thinking," she began, uncharacteristically hesitant. "This cabin is too small for all of us, but I'm not keen on living alone now that I've had company again." She looked directly at Isaac. "You mentioned land near Durango. My late husband left me with a bit saved. Not a fortune, but perhaps enough to contribute to a larger property. Something that might accommodate a separate dwelling for an old woman." Isaac exchanged a surprised glance with Madeleine. "Are you proposing a partnership, Mrs. Evans?" "Catherine," she corrected. "And yes, I suppose I am. Maddie will need help with the baby, especially if there are to be more. And I find I've grown rather attached to my great-nephew." The offer was unexpected but not unwelcome. Having Catherine nearby would indeed be a blessing, especially as Madeleine learned to navigate motherhood. And the additional funds would allow them to purchase a more substantial property to start their ranching venture. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Madeleine said warmly, reaching across the table to squeeze her aunt's hand. "Don't you, Isaac?" "I do," he agreed, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Though I insist on building both houses myself. It's the least I can do for the women who'll be taking care of my son." And so it was decided. As soon as William was strong enough to travel, they would head south to Durango to begin their new life together. First, though, there was the matter of making their family official in the eyes of God and the law. The wedding was a simple affair, performed by the circuit preacher who happened through the nearest town just days after the storm cleared. Madeleine wore her best dress, freshly pressed by Catherine, with wildflowers Isaac had somehow managed to find despite the winter season woven into her hair. William, wrapped in a blanket Catherine had embroidered with his initials, slept peacefully in a basket beside them as they spoke their vows. "I, Isaac James Lancaster, take thee, Madeleine Grace Evans, to be my lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." His voice was steady and sure, his eyes never leaving hers as he spoke the sacred words. Madeleine felt tears of joy spill down her cheeks as she repeated her own vows, hardly able to believe that after so much heartache, she was finally becoming Isaac's wife. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Isaac gathered her into his arms and kissed her with such tenderness that even Catherine discreetly wiped away a tear. "Mrs. Lancaster," he murmured against her lips. "I've waited so long to call you that." "It was worth the wait," she whispered back, her heart so full she thought it might burst from happiness. That night, after William had been fed and settled in his cradle, and Catherine had retired to her room with pointed deliberateness, husband and wife were finally alone. In the soft glow of lamplight, Madeleine felt suddenly shy, despite the evidence of their previous intimacy sleeping just feet away. Isaac seemed to sense her nervousness. He approached slowly, taking her hands in his. "We have the rest of our lives, Maddie," he said softly. "There's no rush for anything tonight. I'm just grateful to hold you again." His consideration only made her love him more. "I've missed you so much," she admitted, stepping into his embrace. "There were days I thought I'd never see you again." "I'm sorry," he murmured into her hair. "Sorry I left. Sorry I wasn't there when you needed me most." "You're here now," she said, tilting her face up to his. "That's all that matters." When he kissed her again, the months of separation and longing melted away. They rediscovered each other slowly, reverently. Their whispered words of love, a prayer of thanksgiving for the miracle of their reunion. Later, as Madeleine lay in the circle of Isaac's arms, William's soft breathing a gentle counterpoint to her husband's steady heartbeat, she felt a sense of peace unlike any she had known before. Whatever the future held, they would face it together as a family. 2 weeks later, with William thriving and growing stronger each day, they loaded their belongings onto a wagon Isaac had purchased in town. The journey to Durango would take several days, but the winter had relaxed its grip enough to make travel possible, if not entirely comfortable. "Are you certain about this?" Madeleine asked Catherine as they made final preparations. "It's not too late to change your mind. And miss seeing this grandson of mine grow up?" "Not a chance," Catherine replied with unusual softness. "Besides, someone needs to teach him proper manners. Can't leave that to a couple of lovesick young fools." The teasing lilt in her voice made Madeleine laugh. Her aunt had revealed a warmer side these past weeks. One Madeleine suspected had always been there, hidden beneath years of solitude and pragmatism. The journey south was challenging but uneventful. Isaac drove the wagon with confident skill, while Madeleine and Catherine took turns holding William, keeping him warm and content despite the jostling of the rough roads. They stopped each night at whatever shelter they could find, twice at small settlements with modest inns, once in a farmer's barn offered generously to the young family. On the 4th day, they crested a hill and the San Juan Valley spread before them, the town of Durango visible in the distance, smoke rising from scattered chimneys. Beyond the settlement lay miles of open country, good grazing land, according to Isaac, with access to water and timber. "What do you think?" he asked, glancing at Madeleine beside him on the wagon seat. "Could you make a home here?" She surveyed the landscape, taking in the snow-capped mountains in the distance, the winding path of the Animas River, the vast openness that promised both challenge and opportunity. Then she looked at Isaac, his face alight with hope and possibility, and at William, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "It's perfect," she said simply. "It's where our story begins." The land they ultimately purchased exceeded even Isaac's hopes. With Catherine's contribution, they secured 1,000 acres of prime grazing land with a year-round creek running through it. The property even included a small but sturdy cabin that would serve as their home, while Isaac built something more substantial for their growing family, as well as a separate dwelling for Catherine. Spring came early to the valley that year, bringing with it new life and new beginnings. Isaac worked from dawn until dusk, dividing his time between constructing their new home and establishing their ranch. He purchased a small herd of cattle and a few good horses to start, his expertise from years of working cattle drives serving him well as he planned for the future. Madeleine blossomed in her role as wife and mother. The shadows of the previous year's hardships faded as she threw herself into creating a warm, loving home for her family. She planted a garden, learned to preserve food for the winter months ahead, and spent countless hours simply delighting in her son's development. William grew stronger each day, his blue eyes so like his father's taking in the world with curiosity and joy. Catherine, true to her word, proved an invaluable help. She watched William when Madeleine needed to assist Isaac with ranch work, taught her niece the domestic skills her own mother had never had the patience to share, and gradually became the loving grandmother figure William would adore throughout his childhood. By midsummer, their new house was complete, a spacious two-story home with plenty of room for the family they both hoped would continue to grow. The day they moved in, Isaac carried Madeleine across the threshold, William gurgling happily in her arms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lancaster," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the front parlor. "It's beautiful, Isaac," she breathed, taking in the craftsmanship evident in every detail. The wide windows that let in abundant light, the stone fireplace he'd constructed with his own hands, the sturdy staircase leading to the bedrooms above, all of it represented not just his skill but his love for them. "Only the best for my family," he replied, sliding an arm around her waist. "And speaking of family," he hesitated, a slight flush coloring his cheeks. "I was thinking it might be time to give William a brother or sister. What do you think?" Madeleine's smile lit up her entire face. "I think that's a wonderful idea, Mr. Lancaster." That night, after William was settled in his new nursery and they were alone in their bedroom for the first time, they came together with all the passion and tenderness of newlyweds, their love deepened by the journey that had brought them to this moment. 3 months later, as the first snow of winter dusted the valley, Madeleine shared the happy news with Isaac that their family would indeed be growing again. The joy in his eyes as he lifted her off her feet and spun her around was something she would treasure forever. "Another baby?" he marveled, placing a gentle hand on her still flat stomach. "God has truly blessed us, Maddie." "He has," she agreed, thinking of how far they had come in just 1 year. From separation and heartache to this life of love and abundance, it seemed almost too perfect to be real. As if reading her thoughts, Isaac pulled her close. "I will never leave you again," he promised softly. "Not you, not William, not this little one. You are my world, Maddie Lancaster." In April of 1877, Madeleine gave birth to a daughter they named Elizabeth Catherine Lancaster, a beautiful, strong-willed little girl who immediately had her father wrapped around her tiny finger. William, now an active 17-month-old toddler, regarded his new sister with a mixture of curiosity and proprietary pride. Life on the Lancaster ranch settled into a rhythm of hard work and simple joys. Isaac's knack for breeding good cattle and horses began to pay off, and within a few years, the Lancaster brand was known throughout the territory for quality stock. Madeleine managed the household with quiet efficiency, creating a haven of warmth and comfort for her growing family. For Catherine, the years brought an unexpected renaissance. The bitter widow gradually gave way to a woman who found genuine pleasure in family life, teaching Elizabeth to sew, taking William fishing in the creek, even occasionally accompanying Isaac to town for supplies, where her sharp bargaining skills became legendary. As the children grew, so did the ranch. Isaac added to their holdings when neighboring properties became available, eventually amassing over 5,000 acres of prime Colorado rangeland. The modest operation he had started with a few dozen cattle expanded to include several hundred head, as well as a respected horse breeding program. William, growing into a lanky boy with his father's quiet confidence and his mother's compassionate heart, showed a natural affinity for ranch work. By the age of 10, He could ride as well as most grown men and displayed an intuitive understanding of animal behavior that impressed even the most experienced hands Isaac employed. Elizabeth, 3 years younger but twice as determined, refused to be left behind. She shadowed her brother constantly, insisting on learning every aspect of ranch operations despite Madeleine's half-hearted attempts to interest her in more traditionally feminine pursuits. "She's just like her mother," Isaac would say fondly, watching his daughter competently saddle her pony or help William with the chickens. "Stubborn as the day is long." "I believe the word you're looking for is determined," Madeleine would correct him with a smile, knowing full well the comparison was apt. The children were 8 and 5 when James Thomas Lancaster joined the family, a robust, cheerful baby who completed their family circle. With 3 healthy children, a thriving ranch, and a love that only deepened with passing years, Madeleine sometimes found herself overcome with gratitude for how completely her life had transformed. On rare occasions, she thought of her parents back in Montana. She had written to them after William's birth, and again after her marriage to Isaac, but received no reply. Pride had prevented further attempts at reconciliation, though she kept them in her prayers and hoped that someday they might want to know their grandchildren. That opportunity came unexpectedly in the summer of 1885, when William was 10. A letter arrived from Willow Creek, addressed in her mother's familiar handwriting. With trembling fingers, Madeleine broke the seal and read the brief message. "Dearest Madeleine, your father has suffered a stroke. The doctors say he may not recover. Before his speech failed him, he asked for you. If you can find it in your heart to come, please do. With love, Mother." Isaac found her on the porch, the letter clutched in her hand, tears streaming down her face. "What is it, love?" he asked, immediately concerned. When she explained, he didn't hesitate. "We'll leave tomorrow. All of us. It's time your parents met their grandchildren, and time for our children to know where their mother comes from." "Are you sure?" Madeleine asked, knowing what it would mean for Isaac to face the man who had treated them both so harshly. "Pa might not even be conscious, and if he is, then perhaps there's a chance for healing before it's too late," Isaac finished gently. "And if not, at least you'll have the peace of knowing you tried." They arrived in Willow Creek 5 days later, the children wide-eyed at this journey to the place where their parents' story had begun. The Evans Ranch looked smaller than Madeleine remembered, the buildings weathered by years of Montana seasons. Her mother, grayer and more stooped than Madeleine had pictured, emerged from the house at the sound of their wagon. For a long moment, Martha Evans stood frozen on the porch, staring at the family before her, the daughter she hadn't seen in over a decade, the son-in-law she'd never met, and 3 children who were strangers to her. Then, with a cry that held years of regret and longing, she rushed down the steps and enfolded Madeleine in her arms. "My girl," she sobbed. "My baby girl has come home." The reunion was emotional for everyone. Martha couldn't stop touching Madeleine's face, as if to convince herself her daughter was really there. She embraced Isaac with unexpected warmth, thanking him through tears for bringing her daughter back to her. But it was the children who truly broke down the barriers of estrangement. William, named for a grandfather he had never met, stepped forward with the natural grace that was becoming his hallmark. "Hello, grandmother," he said politely, extending his hand. "I'm William Isaac Lancaster. These are my sisters, Elizabeth and James." Martha stared at the boy, so clearly Isaac's son in looks, but with Madeleine's gentle eyes, and burst into fresh tears. "You look just like your mother did at your age," she managed, pulling him into a hug that was at first awkward, then warmly returned. Elizabeth, never one to be left out, pushed forward. "Do you have cookies?" she asked bluntly. "Mama says grandmothers always have cookies." The question, so innocently direct, broke the remaining tension. Martha laughed through her tears, taking the little girl's hand. I most certainly do have cookies. Would you like to help me get them? As the children followed Martha into the house, Madeleine held back, her hand gripping Isaac's tightly. I'm afraid to see him, she admitted in a whisper. Afraid of what he might say or not say. Whatever happens, we face it together, Isaac reminded her. Just like always. Thomas Evans lay in the bedroom he had shared with Martha for 40 years, his once powerful frame diminished by illness, the right side of his face slack and unresponsive. His eyes, however, were alert and filled with emotion as Madeleine entered the room. Pa, she said softly, approaching the bed with hesitant steps. It's Maddie. A sound escaped him, not quite a word, but clearly an effort to speak. His left hand moved restlessly on the quilt, reaching toward her. Madeleine took his hand, her heart breaking at how frail it felt in hers. I'm here, Pa. I've brought my family to meet you. Tears leaked from the corners of Thomas's eyes as Isaac stepped forward, William just behind him. Though he couldn't speak, the old man's gaze conveyed what words could not: regret, sorrow, a plea for forgiveness. William, sensing the importance of the moment, moved to the bedside without prompting. Hello, grandfather, he said, his young voice clear and steady. I'm glad to finally meet you. Thomas's hand tightened around Madeleine's, and a sound that might have been his grandson's name struggled from his throat. That's right, Pa, Madeleine said gently. This is William, your grandson, and Isaac, my husband. Isaac stepped forward, his expression respectful but resolute. Mr. Evans, he acknowledged with a nod. I wish we could have met under better circumstances, but I'm glad for the chance now. For a tense moment, Thomas stared at the man who had married his daughter against his wishes. Then, slowly, he raised his good hand toward Isaac. It was a peace offering, however belated, and Isaac accepted it without hesitation, clasping the older man's hand firmly. The girls are with Mother, Madeleine explained, wiping away tears. Elizabeth is 5, and little James is just 3. They're eager to meet you too. That evening, as the extended family gathered around the dinner table, Martha, Madeleine and Isaac, the children, even old Jim who still worked the ranch despite his advancing years, there was a sense of circles closing, of wounds beginning to heal. Thomas couldn't join them, but Martha assured Madeleine he was resting comfortably, aware and grateful that they had come. He's been carrying the weight of what happened for years, she confided when they were alone. Sending you away was the biggest mistake of his life, and he knew it almost immediately. Pride kept him from admitting it until it was almost too late. Why didn't you write sooner? Madeleine asked, the old hurt surfacing despite her desire to move forward. Martha looked away, shame evident in her posture. I wanted to, many times, but I was a coward, Maddie. Afraid to go against your father, afraid you wouldn't forgive us. By the time I found my courage, so many years had passed that I feared you'd want nothing to do with us. I would have answered, Madeleine said softly. I never stopped loving you both, even when it hurt the most. They stayed in Willow Creek for 2 weeks. Thomas's condition improved slightly enough that he could sit up in bed and manage a few words, though full recovery seemed unlikely. The breakthrough came on their 3rd day, when Elizabeth, impatient with being kept from her mysterious grandfather, slipped away from her mother and found her way to his bedroom. Martha discovered them an hour later, Thomas propped up on pillows, the little girl perched on the edge of his bed, chattering away about horses and her doll and how many eggs she'd collected that morning. The old man couldn't respond much, but his eyes never left his granddaughter's animated face, and occasionally a sound resembling laughter would escape him at her forthright observations. After that, the children spent part of each day with their grandfather, filling his quiet room with the noise and energy of youth. William would read to him from the ranch ledgers, solemnly explaining what he'd learned about cattle breeding from his father. Elizabeth told elaborate stories she invented on the spot, complete with different voices for each character. Even little James would toddle in with treasures to show a shiny rock, a feather, a wildflower picked from the yard. For Madeleine, watching her father with her children was a bittersweet joy. This was what might have been all along, had pride and judgment not torn their family apart. Yet she couldn't regret the path her life had taken, not when it had led to Isaac and the beautiful family they had created together. On their final evening in Willow Creek, Thomas asked to speak with Madeleine and Isaac alone. His speech was still labored and difficult to understand, but the message was clear. "Proud," he managed, looking from his daughter to her husband. "Good man. Good family." Then, with visible effort, "Sorry. It's in the past, Pa," Madeleine assured him, clasping his hand. "What matters is now and the future." Isaac, who had remained somewhat reserved with his father-in-law despite the apparent reconciliation, finally spoke the words that had been on his heart since their arrival. "I want you to know, sir, that I have loved your daughter from the moment I met her, and I will continue to love and care for her until my dying day. She and our children are my life's greatest blessing." Thomas nodded slowly, his eyes bright with unshed tears. Then, with painful deliberation, he said the words Madeleine had waited years to hear. "My blessing. Have it now." When they departed the next morning, promises were made to write regularly and to visit again when possible. Martha pressed a small wooden box into Madeleine's hands as they said goodbye. "Your grandmother's jewelry," she explained. "It should have been yours years ago. For you and Elizabeth when she's older." The gesture meant more than the actual contents of the box. It was an acknowledgement of Madeleine's rightful place in the family, a tangible symbol of her parents' acceptance of the life she had chosen. The journey back to Colorado was filled with conversation about their visit, the children full of stories about their newfound grandparents and the Montana ranch that seemed so different from their Colorado home. "Will grandfather get better?" William asked as they crossed into Wyoming territory. Madeleine exchanged a glance with Isaac before answering truthfully. "I don't know, sweetheart. The doctor says he might improve some more, but he'll probably never be completely well again." "Then we should visit more," the boy declared with the simple logic of childhood. "So he can see us grow up." "I think that's a fine idea," Isaac agreed, ruffling his son's hair. "Family is important, no matter how far apart you live." By the time they returned to their ranch, summer was waning. The hands Isaac had left in charge had managed well enough, but there was plenty of work waiting as they prepared for fall roundup and the coming winter. Life settled back into its familiar rhythm, though now enriched by regular letters from Montana. Thomas did indeed continue to improve, regaining more speech and some limited use of his right side. By Christmas, he was able to write a short note to accompany the handcrafted gifts he and Martha sent to their grandchildren. For Madeleine, the healing of that relationship brought a sense of completion to her already full life. The circle that had begun with heartbreak and separation had closed with forgiveness and reunion. Her children would grow up knowing all their grandparents, understanding the entirety of their heritage. In the spring of 1886, as wildflowers carpeted the Colorado rangeland and new calves dotted the pastures, Madeleine and Isaac celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. The ranch hands built a dance floor in the yard, and neighbors from miles around came to join the festivities. Catherine, now in her 70s but still spry, organized the food with military precision, while the children ran wild with excitement. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit around the perimeter of the dance floor. Isaac claimed his wife for a waltz, pulling her close as the fiddler struck up a familiar tune, the same melody they had first danced to at that long-ago social in Willow Creek. "Happy anniversary, Mrs. Lancaster," he murmured against her ear as they moved together in perfect harmony. "Still happy with the life you chose?" Madeleine gazed up at him, This man who had crossed mountains and weathered storms to find her, who had built a life and a legacy with her that exceeded her wildest dreams. "Every single day," she replied with absolute certainty. "I would choose you again in a heartbeat, Isaac Lancaster." As they continued to dance beneath a canopy of stars, their children watching with varying degrees of fascination and embarrassment, Madeleine reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From the painful separation that had nearly cost them everything, to this moment of profound contentment, surrounded by the fruits of their love and labor. The path hadn't always been easy. There had been hard winters and dry summers, times when the ranch barely broke even. They'd lost Catherine just last year, a peaceful passing in her sleep that had left a hole in their family circle. Life in the West demanded resilience and fortitude, qualities both Madeleine and Isaac possessed in abundance. But through it all, they had each other partners in every sense, facing each challenge together, celebrating each joy as one. Their children were growing strong and true, the ranch was prospering, and their love remained the bedrock upon which everything else was built. As the dance ended, Isaac drew her away from the crowd, toward the edge of the property where the land sloped gently down to the creek. In the silvery moonlight, they stood together, looking out over the ranch they had built from nothing. "Remember that first day we came here?" Isaac asked, his arm around her waist. "You were holding William, and I asked if you could make a home here." "I remember," she said softly. "I said it was perfect, that it was where our story begins." He turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "The story's still being written, Maddie. Every day with you adds another chapter more beautiful than the last." In the distance, William's laughter mingled with Elizabeth's indignant protest as they chased each other around the dance floor. Little James, not to be outdone, toddled after them, his chubby legs working hard to keep up. The sounds of their happiness floated on the evening air, a testament to the family Isaac and Madeleine had created against all odds. "I love you, Isaac Lancaster," Madeleine said, leaning into his embrace. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days after." "And I love you, Madeleine Lancaster," he replied, bending to kiss her with the same tenderness he'd shown on their wedding day. "From the moment I first saw you, until long after the stars burn out." As they walked hand in hand back toward the celebration, Madeleine's heart swelled with gratitude for the twists of fate that had brought them to this moment. What had begun in heartache had blossomed into a life richer and more fulfilling than she could have imagined. The journey continued, with all its joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges. But they would face it as they always had together, their love a beacon guiding them home through whatever storms might come. And in the end, that was all that truly mattered.